Hi, let's continue with the next topic, that's inflation. The previous question from UPSC, this is 95. Which one of the following statements is the appropriate description of deflation? Deflation. So, inflation is a phenomenon of rise in prices. Deflation is a phenomenon of fall in prices. And don't get confused with the word called disinflation. Disinflation is a phenomena of falling rate of inflation. It does mean during disinflation there might be a phenomenon of price rises. Prices are rising, but the rate at which the prices are rising is coming down. That's the reason I call it a rate of inflation coming down, and we call this a disinflation. And do find out the difference between reflation, the meaning of reflation, and also stagflation. Even this is a previous question. What is stagflation? Stagflation is simply stagnation plus inflation. So what do you think out of all these things happens to be the most perfect answer? It's a persistent fall in general price level of goods and services. So C happens to be the most appropriate answer. So if you need, there is a in the description I would attach the video that explains all this terminology. So let's go next. With reference to Indian economy, demand pull inflation can be caused or increased by which of the following? When would the demand pull inflation occurs? Inflation is a phenomenon of rise in prices, and if that phenomenon of rise in prices is because of rise in demand, too much money chasing too few goods. So when do too much money, when would you explain this phenomenon? When people are spending a lot of money, the consumption is high. When would that happen? When people have better prospects of making money. And when do generally it happens? When the economy is growing. So any economy growing is bound to experience a phenomenon of inflation, and mostly we call that inflation as demand pull inflation. And other kind of inflation, what we call supply shock inflation or cost push inflation, which is a result of fall in supply, not because of increase in demand, it's mostly because of fall in supply. But here in the case the question asked is, which of these following 5 different things would result in demand pull inflation? Expansionary policies. So here in this case, though it is not mentioned whether it's a monetary policy or fiscal policy, but the fact expansionary policies results in boosting the demand, hence for this seems to be the rest. Fiscal stimulus, yes. And then inflation indexing wages. See, inflation indexing wages does mean if your wages is adjusted to inflation. इसका मतलब क्या है? So whenever the economy is experiencing inflation, the employer ends up simply adjusting the income of the people, wages of the people, by simply increasing that particular income in proportion to the increase in prices of goods and services. So if your wages or salaries are being adjusted with respect to inflation, then we call a phenomenon of inflation indexing wages. But when would this happen? Inflation indexing wages is a result of inflation. So only when there is an inflation you might be, of course, because of your prices, salary is increasing, you might end up spending more. But at the end of the day, if you look at the question asked is, which can be caused or increased by which of the following, isn't it? So this is the result but not the cause. High purchasing power, this seems to be rising interest rates, isn't it? So when the interest rate rises, what happens to the demand? Credit supply decreases. When credit supply decreases, what happens to the demand? It decreases. Hence for this cannot be, isn't it? And henceforth 1, 2, 4. So A happens to the most appropriate answer. With reference to inflation in India, which of the following statements is correct? Controlling inflation in India is a responsibility of government of India only? No. In fact, government of India could control inflation, but most of the time it reduces it to the Central Bank of India, because how could government control inflation? By reducing demand, isn't it? Yes. But how could government reduce demand? By increasing taxes and reducing expenditure. But don't you think any government that increases taxes and reduces expenditure to contain demand becomes unpopular among the people, isn't it? So any initiative of government to contain inflation is unpopulistic, and that's the reason in most of the countries, the governments, though they can contain inflation, they hardly make any effort. So this is wrong. The Reserve Bank of India has no role in controlling inflation. How come if the government of India, because just now we discussed this, government actions results in unpopulistic aspects, then someone has to take the responsibility. Generally monetary authorities are the one who takes the responsibility to contain inflation, isn't it? So in such case the second step also happens to be true. Decrease money circulation helps in controlling inflation. Yes, when money circulation decreases, what happens to the interest rates? increases. When that interest increases, credit supply decreases, and credit supply decreases matlab demand decreases. Demand decrease might result in bringing the prices under control. So C seems to be the appropriate answer. Increasing money circulation does the opposite. So hence for this is not right. Consider the following statements. Weightage of food, okay, food in CPI is higher than the wholesale price index. So if you look at the basket of goods, okay, that we consider when it comes to okay measuring CPI, you might be knowing the fact that around 48% approximately is given to food itself. So this is right. The W does not capture change in price of services. Yes, WPI tracks the change in price of only a basket of commodities. The Reserve Bank of India has now adopted WPI as key measure of inflation and decided to change the key policy rates. In fact, if you look at this current scenario, since 2015, as part of monetary policy framework agreement, the RBI is mandated to tackle retail inflation, which is computed based on CPI rather than WPI. So henceforth, this might not be right, and henceforth A1, 2, okay, 1 and 2 statement happens to be. Consider the following statements. Inflation benefits debtors, inflation benefits the bondholders. Benefits a debtor. Debtor is the one who borrows money, borrower. And inflation benefits the bondholder. Bondholder does mean the one who buys the bond. So iska matlab hai he is a creditor. And most of you by this time aware of the fact, okay, at times of high inflation, real interest rates decreases. I mean, real interest rate is a nominal interest rate minus the rate of inflation. So when the real interest rates decreases, you know the fact creditor loses and debtor gains. So by this logic, so one happens to be the right answer, the rest happens. Current price index base 1960, okay, is nearly 330. This means the price of so in fact, I'm sorry, this question is not yet complete. Imagine, okay, let me simply make it different. The current price index, okay, if the index if the price index is 330 and if the base have okay, let's say 1960 is the base year, and if it is at level 100 and the current price index is 330, what does it mean? Iska matlab kya hai? So let's look at it. That's the very basic meaning of the question. All items cost 3.3 times more than what they did in 1960. All items, okay, this seems to be something you need to take care. Okay, let's look at the alternative. The price of certain selected items have gone up to 3.3 times. Maybe partly this is right. Weighted mean of price of certain items had increased 3.3 times. This seems to be the most appropriate out of all these three. Now let's look at the fourth one. Gold price has gone up 33 times. So doesn't make any sense. So my dear friends, I just suggest you to go through the video corresponding to the WPI and CPI, and I would also link it in, okay, add it in the description. But if you look at, my friends, these index is a weighted average. And if you look at WPI and CPI, they happen to consider the change in price of certain basket of commodities. And when it comes to CPI, also it considers services. And each and every good that's part of this basket would also have certain weightage, because that weightage should reflect the corresponding change in the prices, because the more is the consumption you make and more is the money you spend, the better would be the reflection of that particular change in price. Henceforth, these indices happens to be weighted averages, and the most appropriate answer happens to be obviously 3. Now the question here in this case is 3.3 times matlab kya hai? Simple. If a certain price of goods and services, okay, can be bought at 100 rupees in 1960, and when the index value goes to 330, okay, when the index value goes to 330, iska matlab kya hai? You need 330 rupees to purchase the same basket of goods and services. So a basket of goods and services 100 right now require 330 rupees to purchase same basket. Now by what amount the prices have gone up? 330 by 100, isn't it? So now you could say 3.3 times. The same logic holds good even for Sensex. Imagine if the Sensex right now is let's say 40,000. Sensex value is right now 40,000. Iska matlab kya hai? If you look at the base year of Sensex is around 78. So if you have invested 100 rupees in, okay, in total corresponding 100 rupees in total corresponding to all the shares that's part of Sensex. Of course, that particular shares that's part of Sensex is right now the same, but you can imagine Sensex is really corresponding, okay, Sensex is an index that corresponds to the same basket of shares 78 to this point of time. Okay, 100 rupees invested in 78 would now become 40,000 rupees. Okay, that's what exactly is the meaning of that particular measure of a index. With reference to India, consider the following statements. Wholesale price index India is available on a monthly basis. Yes, not only wholesale price index, CPI also. As compared to CPI index for industrial workers, the WPI gives less weight to food articles. Okay, my dear friends, this industrial workers, as of now, you know the fact, since 2011-12, we do have three different measures. One for urban, CPI for rural, and CPI combined. But in good old days, prior to 11-12, in India, we used to measure consumer price index for industrial workers, consumer price index for urban non-manual employees, and consumer price index for agriculture labor. So these two used to be measured by Ministry of Labor Bureau, and CPI for urban non-manual employees used to be measured by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation in those days. So out of all these things, what is the most appropriate answer? So one is right, but as compared to CPI industrial workers, WPI gives less weightage to food articles. Yes, of course, it's true. In India, inflation is measured by. So what appropriate is the motion? So in fact, it's a very old question, and by this logic, you could make it for answer. Prior to 2015, when it comes to inflation, the very common measure of inflation used to be based upon wholesale price index number. Which of the following brings the CPI number for industrial workers? Just now we discussed is the labor bureau. India has experienced persistent high food inflation in the recent past. Which could be the reasons? What could be the reasons of increase in high food inflation? So why do the prices of food grains rise? Maybe because of the demand for food or falling supply of food, isn't it? Either of these two might result in increase in prices. So now let's look at what could be the reasons. Due to gradual switchover to the cultivation of commercial crops, the area under cultivation of food crops has steadily decreased in the last 5 years by about 30%. No, it's not. Okay, so of course the shifting of people are right now started going for more of commercial crops, but at the same time it's not to an extent of 30%. In fact, at the same time, you could also see there's a tremendous amount of increase in food grain production in this country. As of now, India produces more than 250 million tons of food grains. So this is not a right statement. Consequence of increasing income, the consumption pattern of people have undergone a significant change. Yes, people's ability to happens to spend increases, and that could be a better thing. Food supply has a structural constraint. You would be surprised to know, my friend, 63,000 crore worth agriculture produce in India is being wasted because of bad post-harvest management infrastructure, storage, transportation, supply chain. So food processing, lack of food processing. So this happens to be the reason, one major reason why the food prices in India generally happens to be high. So the most appropriate answer happens to be B. And I think there's one more question that's been missing. So question is with respect to stagflation. So what does the term stagflation mean? इसका मतलब है a phenomena of stagnation and inflation combined. Okay, so I think I was not but this is the question I still remember. So that's about all inflation. Then we'll discuss about the next topic, that's a monetary policy. But I would suggest, my friends, you might be thinking, so all these years 95 to 2021 you only have these few questions from these topics? Not necessary. The very basic purpose of this discussion is to let you and revise the concepts, and henceforth any fact oriented question that has been asked in the previous year is something I am simply excluding from the discussion. So you should keep that in mind. Don't simply think that since 95 to 2021 there are hardly 11-12 questions. Maybe that could be more, and some questions are repeated, and I'm just eliminating it. Literally there are some questions repeated. I insist questions also gets repeated in UPSC, and henceforth that's mostly with respect to the consumption, or simply the what constitutes the basket of CPI, with that too which gives more preference to food articles and all these things. Such kind of questions is what you would be coming across, and who measures these indices. So that's the basic reason. Don't simply think that there are very few questions that's been asked and henceforth it's not an important topic. No. Prior to 2013, occasionally there used to be some fact oriented questions. Those are the questions I happen to exclude. But to be frank with you, since 2013 no question has been left in our part of discussion, because post 2013 there has never been a fact oriented question. Okay, so that's it, we'll discuss. And every time when you just go through these videos with respect to previous questions, I insist you just simply go through, make an attempt of all these questions, and only then come and watch these videos. But without simply making an attempt and answering any of these questions, please don't keep watching these videos. That might not help you, and that doesn't serve the purpose of my discussion also. Thank you. We'll meet later. Bye.